Enjoying the $5,000 a month, Mom? My son Daniel whispered warmly as he hugged me at his Christmas party. And for a moment, I thought I had misheard him, because $5,000 a month was the kind of money that could change a person's life, and yet I had never seen a single dollar of it. The music in the background was soft and cheerful, the kind of classic holiday jazz that made the whole room feel warm and bright. Garland wrapped around the staircase. A tall Christmas tree glittered beside the fireplace. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifted through the air. It should have been a perfect evening. My son Daniel had done very well for himself over the years. At 39, he owned a successful consulting firm in Chicago and lived in a house so large it sometimes reminded me of a boutique hotel. I was proud of him, truly proud. I had worked 2 jobs when he was young, cleaning offices during the day and working the register at a grocery store at night. Also, he could go to college and chase opportunities one never had. Seeing him succeed had always felt like proof that those long years meant something. But when he said those words, $5,000 a month, my heart paused in my chest. I stepped back slightly from the hug and looked up at him, studying his face to see if he was joking. Daniel was smiling in that easy way he had when he believed he'd done something generous. His arm was still around my shoulders. Across the room, his wife Olivia stood beside the bar, speaking to a couple I didn't recognize. She glanced toward us briefly, and for a second our eyes met before she quickly looked away. I forced a small smile, because the room was full of people and I didn't want to cause a scene at my son's Christmas party. $5,000? I said quietly, trying to keep my voice light, as if we were sharing a private joke. What are you talking about, honey? Daniel blinked, the smile still on his face, but now touched with confusion. The monthly transfer, he said. I've been sending it for almost 2 years now. Olivia told me you finally stopped worrying about bills. The words floated in the air. Between us, calm and ordinary, yet something inside me felt suddenly unsteady. 2 years. $5,000 every month. That would be $120,000. Enough to fix the leaking roof over my kitchen. Enough to replace my aging car that stalled every winter morning. Enough to stop counting pennies at the grocery store. I looked down at the glass of sparkling cider in my hand. The bubbles shimmered quietly. Around us the party continued without noticing anything unusual. Someone laughed near the dining table. A child ran past holding a gingerbread cookie. Everything looked normal, but inside my mind something had begun to shift. For the past 2 years my life had been small and careful. After my husband passed away, I had moved into a modest little house about 30 minutes outside the city. It was the kind of place where the porch light flickered and the mailbox leaned slightly to one side. I kept the thermostat low during winter to save on heating. Some months I chose between repairing something and simply learning to live with it broken. I never complained about it to Daniel because I knew he was busy building his life. That was the deal parents make without saying it out loud. You raise them. You help them fly. Then you try not to become a burden. So hearing my son casually mention $5,000 a month felt like hearing about someone else's life entirely. Daniel, I said slowly, I think there must be some mistake. The music changed to a louder holiday song, and the room filled with applause as someone announced dessert had arrived. Daniel frowned slightly. A mistake, he repeated. Mom, I've been sending it since the summer after Dad passed. Olivia helped set everything up through my assistant. My eyes moved again across the room to Olivia. She was still by the bar, but now she wasn't talking. She was watching us. The moment she noticed me looking, she picked up her phone and turned slightly away. My fingers tightened around the glass. I remembered something small then, something I hadn't thought about in months. The year after my husband died, Olivia had offered to help organize my mail because I told her it overwhelmed me sometimes. She said it would be easier if certain financial letters were sent through her so she could sort them. At the time it sounded thoughtful, practical. Olivia had always seemed efficient like that, the kind of person who liked managing details. I had trusted her completely. After all, she was my daughter-in-law, my family. Daniel was still talking, explaining something about automatic transfers and tax documentation, but his voice had started to sound distant in my ears as pieces of memory quietly began to rearrange themselves inside my mind. Little things. Conversations. Olivia offering to handle paperwork. Olivia saying banks sometimes made mistakes. Olivia suggesting we switch the address on a few financial documents so she could keep everything organized. None of it had seemed important before. Yet standing there in the glow of the Christmas tree, hearing my son mention money that had never reached me, those small moments suddenly felt different. Like puzzle pieces I had never realized were part of the same picture. I set my glass down carefully on a nearby table because my hand had begun to tremble slightly. Then I looked back at my son and said the only thing that was completely certain. Daniel, I told him quietly, I've never received a single dollar. Daniel did not respond immediately after I said those words. For a moment, he simply stared at me, the same way he used to when he was a boy trying to understand a difficult math problem. The cheerful noise of the Christmas party continued around us, but the space between my son and me felt strangely quiet. I could see the confusion settling into his expression, slow and heavy, as if his mind was struggling to connect two completely different versions of reality. That cannot be right, he said finally, lowering his voice so the nearby guests could not hear us. Mom, I have been sending the transfers every month. $5,000. Sometimes a little extra around the holidays. I made sure you would never have to worry about money again. I looked at him calmly, though inside I felt a slow wave of disbelief moving through my chest. I thought about the old kitchen faucet in my house that had been leaking for almost a year. I thought about the winter coat I had repaired twice instead of replacing. I thought about the small notebook where I wrote down every bill so I could track exactly how much I could afford to spend on groceries each week. If Daniel had truly been sending that money, my life would have looked very different. Daniel, I said gently, I promise you I have never seen any of that money. He ran one hand through his hair, a gesture he had when he felt frustrated. But that does not make sense, he said. My assistant handles the transfers through the business account. Everything is documented. As he spoke, his eyes drifted across the room toward Olivia. She was no longer at the bar. Instead, she stood near the tall Christmas tree, speaking quietly with a group of guests while holding a glass of white wine. She looked relaxed, even cheerful, but something about the way her shoulders stiffened when Daniel glanced in her direction did not escape my attention. Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket and began scrolling through emails. The screen cast a faint glow across his face. I have confirmation messages for every transfer, he said. Look, here is one from last April, and another from July, and here is December from last year. I leaned slightly closer so I could see the screen. The numbers were clear. $5,000. Every single month. Daniel showed me the recipient line. Margaret Whitmore. My name. My breath slowed as I studied the details. Everything appeared official. Bank confirmations. Transaction numbers. Even notes attached that read monthly support for Mom. I straightened again and folded my hands quietly in front of me. Daniel, I said softly, if that money truly left your account, it never arrived in mine. The music in the living room shifted to a slower song. Somewhere behind us, someone opened another bottle of champagne. Daniel stared at the phone again as if the answer might appear if he looked long enough. Olivia helped coordinate everything when we first set it up, he said slowly. She worked with my assistant to make sure the account information was correct. She said you preferred not dealing with complicated financial details after Dad passed away. My mind returned to the memory from 2 years earlier. The afternoon Olivia had visited my house with a folder of papers and a warm smile. She had spoken gently, explaining that Daniel wanted to help but did not want to overwhelm me with financial discussions. She told me she could handle the paperwork so I could focus on adjusting to life after losing my husband. At the time I had been grateful. I remember making tea for both of us and thanking her for being thoughtful. Now, standing in my son's brightly decorated living room, that memory felt different. Not dramatic, not shocking, just quietly unsettling. Daniel locked his phone and slipped it back into his pocket. His expression had changed from confusion to something more serious. Mom, he said carefully, have you changed banks in the past 2 years? I shook my head. No. Have you given anyone access to your account? No. The silence between us grew heavier. Across the room, Olivia laughed at something one of the guests said, but the sound did not feel natural anymore. It felt distant, like a radio playing in another house. Daniel followed my gaze toward his wife. I watched the moment something in his thinking shifted. Not an accusation. Not yet. Just a realization that there were questions he had never asked before. He inhaled slowly and then said in a calm voice I recognized from his business meetings, I think we need to check the bank records tomorrow morning. I nodded once. That sounds like a good idea. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The Christmas lights on the tree reflected softly in the window beside us. Outside, light snow had begun falling over the quiet street. It should have been a peaceful moment. Instead, a quiet understanding had begun forming between my son and me. Somewhere between the numbers on his phone and the reality of my modest little house, something had gone very wrong. And for the first time that evening, Daniel looked across the room at his wife not with affection, but with the careful attention of someone who had just realized a very important piece of the story might still be missing. Daniel did not call Olivia over right away. Instead, he stood beside me for another minute, watching the room in a way that felt very different from before. Earlier that evening, he had been the relaxed host of a holiday party, greeting friends, laughing easily, making sure everyone had something to drink. Now his eyes moved slowly across the living room, as if he were seeing everything from a new angle. The house was still full of warmth and light. The fireplace crackled gently. Guests gathered near the dining table where plates of dessert were being passed around. Someone began playing an old Christmas song on the piano in the corner. Yet beneath that cheerful surface, something quieter had begun to settle between my son and me. Daniel leaned slightly closer and lowered his voice. "Mom, I need to ask you something carefully," he said. "Please think back to when Olivia helped you with that paperwork after Dad passed away. Do you remember signing anything that might have included account numbers or financial authorization forms?" I thought about that afternoon again. The sunlight coming through my kitchen window. The folder Olivia had brought with neatly organized pages clipped together. At the time, I had trusted her completely. She spoke in calm, reassuring tones, explaining that Daniel wanted to make sure I never struggled financially again. She said there were simply a few forms required to make things easier. I remembered signing 2 or 3 pages without reading every line closely. At the time, it had not felt unusual. Families help one another with paperwork all the time. "I signed a couple of documents," I said slowly, "but nothing about giving anyone control over my money. At least I do not remember anything like that." Daniel nodded once, absorbing the answer without interrupting. Across the room, Olivia laughed again, though this time the sound seemed slightly forced. She was speaking with 2 neighbors from down the street, gesturing toward the Christmas tree as if explaining where they had bought the ornaments. I noticed that she had not approached us since our conversation began. Daniel noticed it as well. His gaze remained fixed on her for several seconds before he spoke again. "There is one more thing," he said quietly. "The transfers were not just regular bank wires. They were automatic deposits scheduled through my financial office. That means the receiving account had to be verified very carefully before the system would allow the payments to continue." I felt my stomach tighten slightly as I understood what he was implying. If the payments had been verified and repeated every month for 2 years, then the money had definitely been going somewhere. Just not to me. Daniel took a slow breath and straightened his shoulders. I recognized that posture from the times I had watched him present business plans during conferences. It was the posture he used when he needed to remain calm while solving a complicated problem. "Let us not discuss this here," he said gently. "Tonight is supposed to be a celebration. We will review everything with the bank tomorrow morning." I nodded again. That sounded sensible. Still, a quiet question lingered in the air between us. Daniel glanced toward Olivia one more time before finally calling her name across the room. "Olivia, could you come here for a moment?" She turned immediately, though there was a brief pause before she began walking toward us. It was only half a second, but it was long enough for me to notice. Her smile returned as she approached, the same polished smile she often used during social gatherings. "Is everything all right?" she asked warmly. "Do you need anything?" "I was just telling the Harrisons how beautiful the snow looks tonight." Daniel placed one hand casually into his pocket, though I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. "We were just talking about something financial," he said in a calm voice. "Mom mentioned she has not been receiving the monthly support payments." Olivia blinked once. The movement was small, but her expression shifted just slightly before the smile returned. "Oh," she said lightly. "That must be a misunderstanding. Maybe the bank delayed something or sent it to the wrong account." Her answer came very quickly. Too quickly. Daniel did not react right away. Instead, he watched her quietly, the same thoughtful look still in his eyes. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but I have the transfer confirmations on my phone. The account information was verified 2 years ago." Olivia lifted her glass and took a small sip of wine. "Well," she replied, her voice still pleasant. Banks make mistakes sometimes. We can sort it out later. Tonight should be about family, not paperwork. Her words sounded reasonable on the surface. Anyone else in the room might have accepted that explanation immediately. But Daniel did not respond. He simply looked at her for a long moment, and I realized that the calm certainty he had earlier about those payments had now turned into something else entirely. Not anger, not accusation, just a careful awareness that the story might be more complicated than he had ever imagined. Finally, he nodded once and said quietly, "Yes. Tomorrow morning, we will sort it out." Olivia smiled again, though this time her eyes flickered briefly toward me before she turned back, toward the guests. The conversation ended there, at least on the surface. Yet as I stood beside my son watching the Christmas lights reflect softly across the room, I understood something important had already changed. Daniel had always trusted his wife completely. For years he had believed that every detail of our family's finances had been handled responsibly and transparently. But tonight, for the very first time, a small crack had appeared in that certainty. And sometimes a single unanswered question is enough to begin unraveling an entire story. The party continued as if nothing unusual had happened, yet the atmosphere around me felt different now. I stood near the window with a small plate of pie that I had not touched, watching snow fall quietly outside Daniel's large living room windows. The flakes drifted slowly through the soft glow of the outdoor lights, settling across the driveway and the tall hedges that lined the property. It was peaceful, beautiful even, yet my thoughts kept circling the same question again and again. If Daniel had truly been sending that money every month, where had it been going? Behind me, I could hear conversations rising and falling like gentle waves. Someone complimented the decorations. Someone else joked about eating too much dessert. Normal holiday sounds. The kind of sounds that usually made a house feel alive. But my mind was far away now, drifting backward through the past 2 years. After my husband passed away, life had become very quiet. The house Daniel helped me move into was small but comfortable, a single-story place with a narrow front porch and a maple tree in the yard that turned bright red every autumn. I remember the first winter there clearly. The heating system struggled on the coldest nights, and sometimes I wore 2 sweaters while reading in the living room just to stay warm. I never mentioned it to Daniel because I knew how busy he was building his company. I was proud of the life he had created. I did not want to interrupt that with small complaints about an old furnace. Looking back now, I realized there had been several moments when Olivia had offered to help with my finances. At the time it felt thoughtful. She often spoke in a gentle, reassuring way, explaining that Daniel worried about me living alone and wanted everything to be organized properly. She offered to sort through some of my mail because she said official documents could sometimes be confusing. Once she even suggested that certain financial letters might accidentally get lost if they continued going to my house. So it might be easier if they were sent through her address first and then forwarded to me if needed. I remember hesitating for a moment that day. Something about the idea felt slightly unusual. But Olivia smiled and said she simply wanted to make things easier while I was adjusting to life after losing my husband. At the time, I had been grateful for the support. Grief makes ordinary decisions feel heavier than they should. When someone offers help during that period, it is natural to accept it. I took a small sip of water and set the glass back on the table beside me. Across the room, Daniel stood near the fireplace, speaking politely with 2 of his business partners, yet his attention seemed divided. Every few seconds his eyes moved through the room until they briefly settled on Olivia. She was speaking animatedly with another group of guests now, telling a story that made everyone laugh. Anyone watching her would see nothing unusual. She looked confident and relaxed, the perfect hostess at a holiday gathering. Yet now that Daniel and I had spoken, small details were beginning to stand out more clearly. The quick pause before she came over earlier. The way she had answered Daniel's question almost too quickly. The calm explanation about banks making mistakes. None of those things proved anything on their own. But together they formed a quiet sense of unease that had not existed before tonight. Daniel eventually excused himself from the conversation near the fireplace and walked slowly across the room toward me. His expression was thoughtful, the same focused look he had earlier. "Are you all right, Mom?" he asked gently. I nodded. "I am fine," I said. "Just thinking." He stood beside me for a moment, looking out the window at the falling snow. The reflection of the Christmas lights shimmered across the glass. "Tomorrow morning I will contact the bank personally," he said after a pause. I want to see every record connected to those transfers. His voice was calm, but I could hear the determination underneath it. Daniel had always been careful with numbers, careful with details. That was part of the reason his company had grown so quickly. I rested my hand lightly against his arm. Daniel, I said quietly, whatever the explanation turns out to be, do not assume the worst tonight. Sometimes misunderstandings happen in complicated financial systems. He nodded, though I could tell his mind was already working through possibilities. Across the room, Olivia glanced in our direction again, and this time her gaze lingered a moment longer before she turned back toward her guests. That small look did not go unnoticed by Daniel. For the rest of the evening, the party continued with the same cheerful music, the same glowing lights, and the same laughter drifting through the house. Yet beneath that festive surface, something else had begun quietly unfolding. A simple question had opened the door to a mystery none of us had expected. And by the time the last guest left and the Christmas lights dimmed late that night, Daniel and I both understood that tomorrow morning would bring answers we could no longer ignore. By the time the last guest left Daniel's house that night, the warmth of the Christmas party had faded into a quiet stillness. The music had stopped. The dishes had been cleared from the dining table. Outside the windows, the snowfall had grown heavier, covering the driveway and the quiet street in a thick white blanket. I stood near the front hallway, putting on my coat, while Daniel walked the final guests to the door. Olivia moved around the living room, collecting empty glasses and plates, her expression calm and focused, as if nothing unusual had happened that evening. If someone had walked into the house at that moment, they would have seen an ordinary scene after a successful holiday gathering. Yet beneath that quiet surface, I could feel the weight of unspoken questions lingering in the air. Daniel returned from the doorway and picked up my scarf from the coat rack. "Let me drive you home tonight," he said gently. "The roads will be slippery soon." I started to tell him it was not necessary, but I could see the determination in his expression. "All right," I replied softly. Olivia looked up briefly when she heard us speaking. "That is thoughtful," she said with a polite smile. "The snow is getting worse. It is probably safer that way." Her voice sounded perfectly normal, yet something about the quickness of her response felt slightly rehearsed. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he helped me wrap the scarf around my neck before opening the front door. The cold winter air rushed in as we stepped outside. Snowflakes drifted slowly through the porch light, swirling gently in the wind. The driveway was already covered with several inches of fresh snow. Daniel walked ahead to brush the snow off the windshield of his car, while I stood near the steps watching the quiet neighborhood. The world felt strangely peaceful under the blanket of snow, as if everything had been softened by the silence of winter. Yet inside my mind the same question continued turning over and over. If the money had been leaving Daniel's account for 2 years, it had to be somewhere. Daniel finished clearing the windshield and opened the passenger door for me. The car heater hummed softly once we were inside, pushing warm air through the vents. For the first few minutes we drove without speaking, the headlights cutting through the falling snow as the road curved gently through the neighborhood. Finally, Daniel exhaled slowly and said, "Mom, I have been thinking about those transfers all evening." I looked out the window at the snow drifting past the streetlights. "I know," I said quietly. "I can see that." He kept his eyes on the road. "The system that handles my company finances is extremely strict. Before the payments started, my assistant had to verify the receiving account with official documents. That means someone provided bank information and identification." His words hung in the warm air of the car. I understood the implication immediately. Whoever had set up the receiving account had done it deliberately. "Tomorrow we will know more," I said calmly. Daniel nodded once, but did not look relieved. Instead, he seemed more focused than before, as if his mind had already begun tracing every step of the process that had happened 2 years earlier. The drive to my house took about 30 minutes. When we arrived, the small porch light glowed softly against the snow-covered yard. Daniel walked me to the door and waited while I unlocked it. The house inside was quiet and familiar, the living room still decorated with the simple Christmas tree I had put up earlier that week. Its small white lights reflected gently against the window. Daniel stepped inside for a moment and looked around the room. His eyes moved slowly across the modest furniture, the old bookshelf near the wall, the small kitchen table where I usually drank my morning coffee. I could see the realization forming again in his expression. This was not the home of someone receiving $5,000 every month. Mom, he said quietly, I am very sorry. I placed my hand gently on his arm. There is nothing to apologize for yet, I replied. We do not know the full story. He nodded, though his jaw tightened slightly. Tomorrow morning I will call my assistant and the bank as soon as the office is open. I want every detail of where that money has been going. I walked him back to the front door. The snowfall outside had slowed now, leaving the street silent and white under the glow of the street lamp. Before he left, Daniel looked at me again with a seriousness I had not seen since he was much younger. Whatever we discover, he said carefully, I promise you we will fix it. I smiled gently, though inside I felt a quiet sense that tomorrow's answers might change more than just a bank record. After Daniel drove away, I closed the door and stood for a moment in the quiet house. The small Christmas tree lights glowed softly beside the window. Somewhere far away a car passed along the main road. I hung my coat on the chair and walked slowly into the kitchen, still thinking about the conversation from the party. For 2 years a stream of money had been moving somewhere under my name. And tomorrow morning, for the first time, we were finally going to discover where it had truly been going. I did not sleep much that night. After Daniel left, the house felt even quieter than usual, and the questions from the evening kept replaying in my mind. I made a cup of tea and sat at the small kitchen table where I usually began my mornings, watching the snow settle across the backyard through the window. The little maple tree outside stood completely still under the weight of the snow, its branches glowing faintly beneath the porch light. Everything looked peaceful, yet inside my thoughts there was a steady current of uncertainty. For 2 years money had been leaving my son's account under my name. $5,000 every month. That was more money than I had ever expected anyone to give me. And yet somehow it had never reached me. Around 2 in the morning, I finally turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, though sleep came only in short, restless stretches. When morning arrived, the house filled with the pale gray light of a winter sky. I woke before my alarm and walked into the kitchen to start the coffee maker. The familiar sound of it brewing felt comforting, a small normal routine in a morning that already felt heavy with unanswered questions. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The yard was covered in a smooth white layer that made the entire neighborhood look freshly painted. I had just poured my first cup of coffee when my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. Good morning, Mom, he said, his voice already alert and focused. I have been on the phone for almost an hour. I sat down at the table, holding the warm mug between my hands. That was fast, I said quietly. What did you find? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, as if Daniel was organizing the information before explaining it. The transfers definitely left my account, he said carefully. Every single one of them. My assistant confirmed the payments started 22 months ago. That is a total of $110,000 so far. Hearing the number spoken aloud made the situation feel even more real. $110,000 had been moving somewhere under my name while I had been carefully budgeting my grocery bills. Where did the bank say the money went? I asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. That is the part that concerns me, he replied. The receiving account is listed under your name, but the mailing address connected to that account is not your house. My fingers tightened slightly around the coffee mug. What address is it? I asked. Daniel hesitated for half a second before answering. It is the address of the house I share with Olivia. For a moment I said nothing. The quiet kitchen seemed even stiller than before. The refrigerator hummed softly in the corner, and the clock ticked on the wall, marking each second with calm indifference. Are you sure? I asked gently. Yes, Daniel said. The bank verified it twice. The account was opened in your name, but the contact information and mailing address point to my home address. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the information settle. That detail alone did not prove anything yet, but it explained something important. If statements and confirmations had been mailed somewhere other than my house, I would never have known those payments existed. Daniel continued speaking, his voice steady but more serious now. The bank also said the account was opened with identification documents submitted electronically 2 years ago. They are sending me copies of everything so I can review them. I thought back again to the afternoon Olivia had come to my house with those papers after my husband passed away. The folder. The calm explanation that Daniel wanted to make sure everything was organized. The forms I had signed without reading every line closely because I trusted the person sitting across the table from me. Daniel, I said slowly, did Olivia help your assistant set up the account when those transfers started? There was another quiet pause on the phone. Yes, he said finally. She told me she would coordinate the paperwork so it would not stress you during that time. The answer was not surprising, yet hearing it confirmed aloud made the situation clearer. Outside the kitchen window, a light breeze moved across the snowy yard, sending a small powder of snow drifting off the branches of the maple tree. I am going to meet with the bank manager in person this morning, Daniel said after a moment. I want to see every document connected to that account. I nodded, even though he could not see me. That is a good idea, I said calmly. When you learn more, call me. Daniel did not end the call immediately. For several seconds he remained silent, as if weighing the meaning of everything he had just discovered. Finally he spoke again, more quietly than before. Mom, if the documents show what I think they might show, then someone in this house has been handling money that was meant for you. I understood exactly who he meant without him needing to say the name. I looked out at the quiet white yard again and took a slow breath. Then today, I said gently, we will finally learn the truth. After the phone call ended, I remained sitting at the kitchen table for a long time, staring quietly at the steam rising from my coffee. The house was still, and the morning sunlight had begun reflecting off the snow outside, filling the room with a pale glow that made everything look calm and ordinary. Yet nothing about the situation felt ordinary anymore. Daniel had confirmed that the account receiving the money carried my name, but his home address. That meant every statement, every notification, every official letter had been sent somewhere I would never see it. Someone had made sure of that. I finished my coffee slowly and then began moving through my morning routine, though my thoughts stayed with the conversation from the phone call. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang again. Daniel's voice sounded different this time. It was steadier, but beneath the calm I could hear a quiet intensity. I am at the bank now, he said. I have the documents in front of me. I could hear faint office sounds behind him, the low murmur of voices and the soft clicking of keyboards. What do they say? I asked. There was a pause as he turned a page. The account was opened online using scanned identification and digital signatures, he said carefully. The identification belongs to you. Your driver's license and social security number. I closed my eyes briefly. Then whoever opened it had access to my documents. I said. Yes, Daniel replied. And there is something else. Another pause followed. The digital submission came from a home internet address. My home internet address. The words settled quietly in the air between us. I could almost picture the documents sitting on the desk in front of him. 2 years ago, someone inside that house had opened an account using my identity and connected it directly to the transfers Daniel believed were helping me. Daniel, I said gently, are there signatures? Yes, he answered. Electronic signatures under your name. But the bank manager says they were completed on the same computer used to submit the application. I let out a slow breath. I remembered that afternoon again, the one when Olivia had sat across from me with the folder of paperwork after my husband passed away. She had explained that Daniel wanted to make sure everything was organized so I would not have to worry about finances. I had trusted her completely when she asked me to provide copies of my identification for the records. At the time, it had seemed like a responsible thing to do. Daniel continued speaking. The bank also showed me the transaction history. The money did not stay in that account very long. Every month after the deposit arrived, most of it was transferred again within a few days. Transferred where? I asked quietly. Daniel did not answer immediately. I heard another page being turned. When he spoke again, his voice had grown even more controlled. Several places. Credit card payments. Online retail accounts. Travel bookings. And one private investment account. I felt a calm realization settling over me. The pieces of the story were no longer scattered fragments. They were beginning to form a clear pattern. For nearly 2 years, someone had quietly redirected the money Daniel believed he was sending to support his mother. Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter now. Mom, the secondary account receiving the largest transfers is registered under Olivia's name. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall as I absorbed those words. Outside, the snow sparkled under the morning sun, covering the yard in bright, white silence. I see, I said softly. Daniel inhaled slowly. I have not spoken to her yet, he said. I wanted to understand everything first. I appreciated that decision. Daniel had always believed strongly in facts before conclusions. What will you do now? I asked. There was a longer pause this time. I imagined him sitting in the bank office with the documents spread across the desk. First, I am going to bring copies of everything home, he said finally. Then Olivia and I are going to have a very direct conversation. His voice remained calm, but there was no uncertainty left in it. Daniel, I said gently, remember that understanding the truth is more important than anger. I know, he replied quietly, but I also know that someone has been making financial decisions in my house using your name. He paused again before adding, and today I am going to find out exactly how that happened. After we ended the call, I remained seated at the kitchen table, watching the sunlight slowly move across the snow outside. For 2 years the truth had been hidden behind paperwork and quiet assumptions. Now, piece by piece, the story was finally beginning to reveal itself. After Daniel left the bank that morning, the weight of the documents in his briefcase felt heavier than their actual paper. The snow had begun melting under the midday sun, leaving thin streams of water running along the sidewalks outside the bank building. He sat in his car for several minutes before starting the engine, reviewing the information one more time in his mind. The numbers were precise. The records were clear. Every transfer had followed the same pattern for nearly 2 years. The money arrived under my name and then quietly moved again within days. And the largest receiving account belonged to Olivia. When Daniel finally drove home, the roads were wet and shining under the winter light. Inside the house, the morning stillness remained. Olivia was in the kitchen when he entered, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee and her phone in her hand. She looked up when the door closed behind him. You are back early, she said casually. Did the bank answer your questions? Daniel removed his coat slowly and set his briefcase on the dining table before speaking. His movements were calm and deliberate, the same careful rhythm he used during important business meetings. Yes, he replied. They answered all of them. Olivia watched him quietly for a moment, her expression neutral. And, she asked with a small smile, was it just a simple mistake like I suggested? Daniel opened the briefcase and placed several documents on the table. The crisp pages reflected the light from the kitchen window. Not exactly, he said evenly. Olivia stepped closer, glancing down at the papers without touching them. What do they say? Daniel rested one hand on the back of the chair and looked directly at her. They show that the account receiving the monthly transfers was opened using my mother's identification, he explained calmly. But the application was submitted from our home internet connection. Olivia's smile faded slightly. That does not necessarily mean anything, she replied quickly. Someone could have accessed the network. Daniel nodded once, acknowledging the possibility. That is true, he said. But the documents also show that most of the money was transferred again within days of arriving. Olivia crossed her arms lightly. So, she asked. Daniel slid another page across the table. The secondary account receiving those transfers belongs to you. The kitchen grew very quiet. The refrigerator hummed softly behind them. Outside a car passed slowly along the wet street. Olivia looked down at the page for several seconds without speaking. Then she lifted her eyes again. Daniel, you are misunderstanding the situation, she said carefully. I was managing the money for your mother. Daniel did not raise his voice. Managing it how? He asked. Olivia gestured toward the papers. You told me you wanted to support her, but you were worried about how she handled finances after your father died. I thought it would be safer to organize the money first, and then help her use it when she needed something. Daniel listened without interrupting. His expression remained composed, though his eyes never left her face. For 2 years, he asked quietly. Olivia hesitated. I was planning to tell her eventually, she said. I just wanted everything structured properly first. Daniel leaned back slightly against the chair. According to these records, a large portion of that money paid your credit card balances, he said calmly. Olivia's eyes flickered toward the documents again. Some of those purchases were household expenses, she replied quickly. Travel bookings were business trips with you. I kept track of everything. Daniel considered her words for a long moment. The calmness in his voice never changed when he spoke again. Olivia, the investment account receiving the final transfers, is also in your name. That detail seemed to stop the conversation for a moment. Olivia opened her mouth slightly, as if preparing another explanation, but no words came immediately. Daniel folded his hands lightly on the table. I did not come home to argue, he said quietly. I came home because I wanted to hear the truth directly from you. Olivia looked toward the kitchen window where the melting snow dripped slowly from the edge of the roof outside. The confident expression she usually carried during social gatherings was gone now, replaced by something more uncertain. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said softly. Daniel nodded once, though his voice remained steady. "Intentions matter," he said, "but so do actions." The documents remained spread across the table between them, each page a quiet record of decisions made over the past 2 years. For the first time since the conversation began, Olivia seemed to understand that the situation could no longer be explained away with quick answers or polite smiles. The facts were sitting in plain view, and Daniel was no longer the man who had simply trusted everything was handled correctly. He was now the man asking careful questions about what had truly been happening inside his own home. Inside the kitchen, the silence stretched longer than either of them expected. Olivia remained standing beside the table, while Daniel looked calmly at the documents spread across the surface. The late morning light coming through the window reflected off the white pages, making every number and transaction line appear even clearer. For 2 years, those quiet records had existed without anyone asking questions. Now they were impossible to ignore. Olivia finally pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, folding her hands together as if she needed a moment to gather her thoughts. "Daniel," she said softly, "you have to understand something. When your father passed away, everything in this family changed. Your mother was alone, and you were traveling constantly for work. I thought someone needed to take control of the situation." Daniel listened without interrupting. His expression remained calm, but his attention was focused entirely on her words. "I was not trying to steal anything," Olivia continued. "I believed it would be easier if the money stayed under my management until the right time. Your mother has always been careful with money, but sometimes people who are grieving do not make the best financial decisions." Daniel looked down briefly at the documents again. "So your solution was to open an account under her name without telling her," he said quietly. Olivia hesitated. "I intended to explain it later," she answered. But as time passed, the situation became complicated. Daniel raised his eyes again. "Complicated how?" he asked. Olivia sighed softly and glanced toward the window. Outside, the snow had almost completely melted from the branches of the trees. "At first I moved the money into an investment account," she said. "I believed it would grow over time and become something meaningful for her future. But then our expenses increased. The house renovation, the travel for your conferences, the credit card balances. I told myself I would replace the money before anyone noticed." Daniel did not react immediately. He simply listened, allowing the explanation to unfold completely. "But the months kept passing," Olivia added quietly, "and the transfers kept coming." The refrigerator hummed again in the background, filling the silence between sentences. Daniel slowly gathered the papers into a neat stack. "Olivia," he said after a moment, "the issue is not whether you plan to repay it later. The issue is that the money was never yours to manage in the first place." Olivia lowered her eyes to the table. "I know that now," she replied. Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street for several seconds before speaking again. His voice remained calm, but carried a clear sense of resolution. "The bank has already frozen the account that was opened under my mother's name," he said. "They are also preparing a full report of the transfers that followed. Every dollar can be traced." Olivia looked up quickly. "Daniel, please," she said. "We can handle this privately." He turned back toward the table. "We are handling it privately," he replied. "But that does not mean we pretend it did not happen." He placed the documents back into the briefcase and closed it carefully. "The first step is returning the money that belongs to my mother," he continued. "The bank confirmed that most of the funds in the investment account are still there. They will be transferred directly into a new account under her control this afternoon." Olivia nodded slowly, absorbing the reality of the situation. Daniel's voice softened slightly when he spoke again. "My mother trusted both of us," he said. "That trust matters more than the money." Olivia remained silent, her gaze fixed on the table. After a moment, Daniel picked up his coat. "I am going to visit her now and explain everything," he said. "When I come back tonight, we will talk about what happens next for our family." Olivia did not try to stop him. She simply watched as he walked toward the door. Outside, the afternoon sunlight had begun to dry the pavement, leaving only small patches of snow along the edges of the sidewalks. When Daniel drove away from the house, he carried the documents with him. But more importantly, He carried a clear understanding of what had truly happened over the past 2 years. And for the first time since the conversation began at the Christmas party, the truth was no longer hidden behind paperwork or quiet assumptions. It had finally stepped into the open where it could be faced honestly.